Okay, now you can get excited. Now you can get excited. Excellent. Hi. My name is Heather Moran, and I'm the CEO here at 6th and I. And whether you're here with us in person or virtually, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'm thanking you from 6th and I, and also for our Politics and Prose partners. Thank you so much for supporting nonprofits and independent bookstores. I am thrilled to welcome you all to our first sold-out author event since the before times. So, by show of hands, how many of you, is this your first time at 6th and I? Oh, that's so nice. Oh, I got goosebumps. Oh, welcome to this special place. I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. We opened in 1908, and the building was a synagogue for 45 years, and then home to an African Methodist Episcopal church for the next 50. And then when the church relocated and put the building up for sale in the early 2000s, the highest bid was from someone who wanted to turn it into a nightclub. It would have been a banging nightclub. We all know that, we all know. But within 24 hours, 3 local real estate developers with a vision for cultural and Jewish life in DC saved the building. This month kicks off the celebration of our 18th anniversary as a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. We aim every day to inspire more meaningful and fulfilling lives through an unexpected mix of experiences that embrace the multifaceted identities of everyone that we serve. Tonight, it is my honor to introduce Ocean Vuong as we celebrate the release of his new poetry collection, Time as a Mother. In it, Ocean searches for life among the aftershocks of his mother's death, embodying the paradox of sitting within grief while being determined to survive beyond it. His vivid and brave poems contend with personal loss, the meaning of family, and the cost of being the product of an American war in America. Ocean is also the author of the New York Times bestselling novel On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, as well as the critically acclaimed poetry collection Night Sky with Exit Wounds. Across his works, he explores the effects of intergenerational trauma, the refugee experience, and the complexities of identity and desire with breathtaking eloquence and clarity. In 2019, at just 30 years old, Ocean received a MacArthur Genius Grant in recognition of his profound experimentation with language and form. Ocean Vuong will be in conversation this evening with his high school classmate, Kat Chow, a reporter. How cool is that? As you know, Kat is a reporter, a writer, and a founder of NPR's Code Switch. Kat is, maybe you didn't know, but now you do. Kat is also the author of the New York Times notable book of 2021, Seeing Ghosts, which is an exquisite portrait of grief following the death of her mother from cancer. Ocean has described Kat's book as a courageous act of excavation and salvage. Later in the program, we look forward to your questions. At that time, you can line up at the microphones in either aisle. And they're down here on the main level, but for those of you on the balcony, please, you're welcome to come down and ask questions. And then we also have autographed copies of Ocean and Kat's book for sale in the lobby. Thank you all again, both here and at home, for being here with us tonight. And please join me in giving Ocean Vuong and Kat Chow a warm welcome to 6th and I.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? No, okay. Now, okay. I get louder as I get braver. Well, thank you so much. This might very well be the most beautiful place I've ever had the luxury of reading poems in. So thank you to Six and I and to the DC community. Politics and Prose, incredible, steadfast, independent bookseller. And for you all for being here for poems. Thank you for being here for poems. I can't say that enough. When I started my life as a writer, as a poet, I was told, perhaps rightfully so, to not expect an audience. I think it's good advice for a poet. And so this, to have any crowd, let alone a sold-out one, in this beautiful space is not lost on me. And this is all the cherry on top. I don't take this for granted, and I hope I can live up on the level of syntax and the sentence to your vote of faith in me tonight. So thank you for that, and thank you to my dear, dear friend Kat Chow, and yes, high school classmate. I like to say we both went to high school together. We also survived high school together. So thank you for being a sister in that journey. I'm just going to read two poems, semi-long-ish, and then we'll have a conversation. Thank you so much again for braving the rain and for being here and held in this cozy, beautiful space. Beautiful, short loser. Stand back. I'm a loser on a winning streak. I got your wedding dress on backward, playing air guitar in these streets. I taste my mouth the most, and what a blessing. The most normal things about me are my shoulders. You've been warned. Where I'm from, it's only midnight for a second, and the trees look like grandfathers laughing in the rain. For as long as I can remember, I've had a preference for mediocre bodies, including this one. Tell me this. How come the past tense is always longer? Is the memory of a song the shadow of a sound, or is that too much? Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I imagine Van Gogh singing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah into his cut ear and feeling peace. Green voices in the rain. Green rain in the voices. Oh no, the sadness is intensifying. How rude. Hey, knocks on my skull. Can we go home now? That one time Jackson passed out beside a triple stack of jumbo pancakes at Denny's after top surgery. I can't believe I lost my tits, he said a minute before, smiling through tears. The sadness in him ends in me tonight. It ends tonight, I shouted to the cop who pulled us over for dreaming. I'm not high, officer. I just believe in miracles. Tomorrow, partly cloudy with a chance. I'm done talking, sir. I'm saying what I feel. Inside my head, the war is everywhere. I'm on the cliff of myself, and these aren't wings, they're futures. For as long as I can remember, my body was the mayor's nightmare. Now, I'm a beautiful short loser dancing in the green. Do you think I'll need a gun where we're going? Can you believe my uncle worked at the cult factory for 15 years only to use a belt at the end? Talk about discipline. Talk about good Lord. Maybe he saw that a small thing moving through a large thing is more like a bird in a cage than a word in the mouth. Nobody's free without breaking open. I'm not sad, he told me once, laughing. I'm just always here. See, officer, magic is real. We all disappear. Why aren't you laughing? No, not beauty, but you and I outliving it, which is more so. Somehow, I got me for days, got this late light in the yard, leaving blood on the bone-colored fence. This thrash of spring we drown in to stay a while and mean it. I mean it when I say I'm mostly male. That I recall every follicle in the failure, the way they'll remember God after religion, alone, impossible, and good. I know the room you've been crying in is called America. I'm sorry, the door is not invented yet. Finally, after years, I'm now a professional loser. I'm crushing it in losses. I'm mopping the floor where Jackson's drain bags leaked on his way to bed. I'm done talking, officer. I'm dancing in the rain with a wedding dress, and it makes sense. Because my uncle decided to leave this world intact. Because taking a piece of my friend away from him made him more whole. Because where I'm from, the trees look like family, laughing in my head. Because I'm the last of my kind, at the beginning of hope. Because what I did with my one short, beautiful life was lose it on a winning streak. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This last poem is called Woodworking at the End of the World. In a field, after everything, a street lamp shining on a patch of grass. Having just come back to life, I lay down under its warmth and waited for a way. That's when the boy appeared, lying next to me. He was wearing a Ninja Turtles t-shirt from another era, the colors far away. I recognized his eyes, black buttons salvaged from the coat I used to cover my mother's face at the end. Why do you exist? I wanted to know. I felt the crickets around us, but couldn't hear them. A chapel on the last day of war. That's how quiet he was. The town I had walked from was small and American. If I stayed on my knees, it would keep all my secrets. When we heard the woodcutters coming closer, destroying the past to build the future, the boy started to cry. But the voice that came out was an old man's. I reached into my pocket, but the gun was gone. I must have dropped it while burying my language farther up the road. "It's okay," the boy said at last. "I forgive you." Then he kissed me, as if returning a porcelain shard to my cheek. Shaking, I turned to him. I turned and found, crumpled on the grass, the faded red shirt. I put it over my face and stayed very still, like my mother at the end. Then it came to me, my life. I remembered my life, the way an axe handle, mid-swing, remembers the tree. And I was free. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was so beautiful, Ocean.
Thank you.
You know, of all the places that we have talked in, my car being one of them for a couple hours as we drove from where Ocean lives in Massachusetts to where we went to high school in Connecticut. I think 6th and I is one of the most beautiful spaces. So can we give it up for Ocean again?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, a recurring theme in our friendship that I think you and I always come back to whenever we talk is this idea of mothers and how mothers are not exactly what we would expect, that the definition can be so loose and amorphous, but also forgiving in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I guess when you told me the name of this new collection, Time as a Mother, which is just so beautiful, I was so struck by that. Can you? I don't think I've really ever gotten to ask you where this title came from and the impulse to write that.
Yeah, I found a parallel in both Vietnamese culture and American culture around the word mother effer. And the way we use it in the lexicon, I think there's nothing, it's so specific, right? There's a job that word really does, and I think the title hints at that, right? Time is it's a mother, right? And I realized that, in growing up in New England, I would hear it, right? That winter was a mother. And in Vietnamese, we would say, "Đổ má." But we wouldn't say mother as well. We would say "đổ." And so I realized that we don't actually want to say that. We don't want to say that phrase, but we're borrowing it. And that aporia, that paradox of expressing something, but also regretting its formation.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a discomfort in saying that, because we don't want that to exist, right? And in Vietnam, if you say that to somebody, you could die, right? We take that very seriously. And so there is this reification of mother and motherhood, despite so much of the patriarchal structures and the misogyny inherent in both cultures. There's some sort of built-in desire to express that phrase, but also come right up to it. And I thought that tension is where I kind of lean forward as a writer. You know, so that's one answer. Another is that I just felt that time is much more capacious than the way we've gendered it in the male form. Father time stops for no one.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's much more motherly in that all time gives birth to the present.
Yes, it
This
creates
is possible because of time. Time is a capacious opening. It's a site of possibility rather than what we've been taught all the time, which is that it's this linear, you know, all-encompassing force, like a train that's sort of slamming right into the present. And I think having it be more, and taking that even away from femaleness and saying, well, what if there's male forms of mothering,
Right.
and motherness, right? How do we complicate that? And I think the page, whereas, you know, the borders and the material world makes change and transformation often so difficult, although possible, the page makes it instantaneously. And sometimes language, I think, is the most malleable technology because it foregrounds a concept or a thought. And I just love, there's something so charming and pleasurable and actually deeply resonant in both cultures stopping just short of completing that phrase, but signaling its expression. To me, that is an innovative way to wield it.
And there's something almost, I mean, it's subversive in a lot of ways, right? Where time is a mother. That's 4 words, I mean, possibly 5, depending on how you let yourself, you know, continue to say the sentence. But I love also that it dares to be optimistic in a way. And I think that one thing I was so struck by with this collection is how, in a lot of ways, there is a playfulness and an optimism and a joy that you insist upon. And your humor, your wryness that I've come to know. Ocean is one of the sharpest, wittiest people I know. He has the best memory, truly. And it makes me so thrilled that this is in your collection. Can you talk about why you really insisted upon that subversion and that joy?
Yeah, joy is hard. It's hard. Because I think we all know why it's special, because it's amplified by hurt. And this is expressed in how my grandmother would talk about it. She says, laughter, she calls me my child, Gong, Gong ơi. Laughter is like cake. Eat it and don't ask who brought it. And there's so much wisdom in that, you know? And I realized growing up as a refugee, raised by women, that these women laughed so often and so easily because their laughter is amplified by the horrors that they've seen. And so what that turns into, the horror that they've witnessed, yes, they've struggled with it, but it also informs a delight in life. There's a levity in delight in the present. And because I grew up in the house where laughter was so medicinal, and beauty was so medicinal, it wasn't decorous, it wasn't frivolous. You know, we feminized beauty first by making it decorous and thereby turning it frivolous and expendable. But in fact, depending on who we are, what we've traversed, beauty is medicinal. And I think in that way, laughter and joy to me was a serious matter. And I felt like as a novice writer, I didn't have the chops to really execute it in my first 2 books robustly. Any comedian would tell you that it's all about timing. And timing is hard to do as a writer. I felt like I had to learn and mature into using this tool well. I also was dealing in the first two books with subject matter that was not lived by me. A lot of it was trauma experienced by not only my elders, but through research by older Vietnamese in the diaspora. And so I didn't want to make it witty or camp, because I was so nervous about a majority white readership, which is what the demographics are for readers in America, laughing at us or being invited to laugh at my elders' pain. I just couldn't risk it. And on the other hand, I didn't have the skills to do it well. And in this book, you know, after writing for 15 years, I felt more confident in being able to use these tools. And, you know, it's every writer's life is a questing. You're never finished. I mean, if I got another crack at this book, commas would shift and words would move around. So you just get very close. But I think I respected the power of humor too much to be sloppy with it, you know. And I think that's one of the worst things you can do as a writer is be sloppy. I really love. I believe it was Joan Didion who says that there's no luck in writing. I think that's so true. You know, even in photography, sometimes the light is just right, but in writing there is no luck. You have to really get it right, and you can't really fake it.
Right.
And so, humor took a long time to learn how to do.
You know, you said beauty is medicinal, which I think is such a wonderful way to put it that I had to just write that down. I think humor is too. And I've noticed in this collection, you know, we've been talking a lot about language tonight, and you have such a dexterity with language in a way that often makes me think about words in a new way. And there's a poem in here where, in particular, you look at language that is, you know, quite violent, that we might not really think about at first. And you put it all together, and it's so, so stark. Can you talk about just extracting that meaning? I mean, I think it really, as a reader, it makes me sit up, and there's just so much attention to it that I think is really remarkable.
Yes, it's a sonnet that is borrowed. It's a borrowed poem. It's a found poem. It borrows, you know, toxic masculinity in its languages and its lexicons. You're killing it, you're smashing it. And it just kind of collapses the context that it's often used in. Because I think when we dilute these violent terms within context and structures, which is how we often use them, we almost lose sight of their sources, their violent origins, which have an impact on us. Words mean something, right? Even if it's metaphor, the metaphor comes from somewhere. And I felt that I wanted to kind of employ the poem to do something only a poem can, which is what, you know, in semiotics we would say the semiotic code, you know, for literary nerds out there, Saussure, Stuart Hall. And I think for me, I'm really interested in taking things out of their fixed semiotic codes into new ones. And so if you take these violent terms, you murdered it,
I'm dead.
You tore them a new one, right? Smash her, I bagged that broad, right? These terms of acquisition that are often used to celebrate each other, but you take them out of the context and you layer them, they become concussive, evidentiary products of who we are. Suddenly there is a DNA of an American lexicon in the traditional form of the sonnet with a volta. And it's a poem that I haven't read aloud, and I'm still very uncomfortable reading aloud. It's a poem that's makes me uncomfortable having finished it.
Yeah.
But it's the most, I think it's the most, one of the more proudest poems that I've done, because it's not something I would have been able to do as a younger poet, because it's using so much faith in language itself.
Right.
That layering these words, these phrases, these canned phrases, has their own power. And if I was a younger poet, I would have tried to manipulate it too much. I would not have as much trust in the horror of language.
There was a risk there that you were taking, right? I mean, and I think that that poem in particular, there's something so beautiful about it because it strikes me as reclamation. And not to say that writing is necessarily healing or even cathartic, but it kind of makes me think of something that you and I have also talked about, which is whether or not writing can be cathartic, if there is such thing as catharsis. And when you and I spoke many years ago, I think one of the first times we met, so we actually didn't know each other in high school. We sort of existed in parallel lives with each other, the few Asians at Glastonbury High School. But in one of our first conversations as adults, where we were driving around Glastonbury, I remember the way you described writing to me felt as if when you were sitting down, handwriting things, there was something that was so powerful in that. You were constructing something. It wasn't quite healing, but you were making sense of language as a way to make sense of yourself. But can writing be cathartic? What does it mean to you in that sense?
I think it has the capacity to. It also has the capacity to heal. I think it's not, we shouldn't force ourselves to heal through language, but it can do that. And I think it's important to remind each other of that, because after the confessional school of poetry, the reaction to that was that language or art that heals must be less than. If art can serve healing of any kind, then it's no longer serious art. It's no longer art for art's sake. And I do think there is a patriarchal bent in that, right? This sort of forcing a rarefication of art that is a vertical valuation, that all art rises above, right? There's this idea that language is good when it's elevated. So we have this sort of perhaps theological, perhaps this museum, or even class-based relationship with art's function, and that something, as soon as something has use, it's now a public service. It's a municipal possibility rather than a reified, a holistic or spiritual, or something that is in the holy realm of art, where we've often associated it. But I think art has always had social functions. The most revolutionary works, we go back to Basho's travelogue, inventing and expanding the hybrid form of the travelogue called the haibun, where he has a travelogue followed by a haiku. Using that to kind of help Japan heal out of centuries of the shogunate, where there were so many wars and battles, and travel was impossible. Centuries and generations would not be possible to move from one village to another. And so I argue that in Basho came out of this Tokugawa period of peace, which brought forth one of the most radical poetry traditions in Japan, but also ink block printing, the art that we know today. So poetry came out of peace. We often have this myth that we need to have suffering to make good art. And that also conflates with the myth of the starving or this struggling artist, the romanticizing of pain as something that meld art together, right? And I think it's important to allow the capacity, if we really believe in language as a tool to open, reform, breach new ground, that it has to be able to be allowed to help us heal, but also, as we've seen, every single year with various regimes around the world, various parties and systems and speeches, administrations, it could easily be used to hurt and harm, and the ripple effects, are amplified. And so I think I approach language as this open medium that it's up to us, right? If we take the agency out of it, we lose sight that everything good or everything harmful comes out of our intention. We make these things. They're not just sitting there with their own intentions.
I love that you just put that word agency up against language, because I think, we have a lot of lawyers in the audience, I'm assuming, because this is DC, but I think most people here know that words matter so much. And form does too, in a lot of ways. I think a lot about how your novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, comes as a letter that little dog, the speaker, writes to his mother, who will never really be able to read it. And so in a way, it's a message that will never really be told, but the act of having told it is enough. And I know you've spoken about this a bit, but for Time as a Mother, who is this addressed to, in a way? Or who did you write this to or for? And I want to make the distinction between writing to someone and writing for someone.
Yeah. I've given up on the idea of writing for an audience or a specific audience, because I've been in enough rooms, even from starting out in New York in reading in bars to publishing now 3 books. Every room I've gone into, the audience is different. Mm-hmm. The audience in Missouri is different from the audience in Norway, in California, in El Paso, Texas. So people come from all walks, and I think a vocation that's really important to me is to really respect the potential reader. And for me, the best way to respect the potential reader is to ignore them. I don't mean that glibly, I know, but it's what I mean is that if I write towards a phantom of an audience, then I start to take my own agency out. I start writing towards fear or pandering or expectations that aren't true, because people are so different. Why would I create an abstraction out of idiosyncrasies and write towards an abstraction? That's a delusion.
Right.
So I approach the page with this faith, and I think it's faith because there's no proof of it anytime I do it. Writing any poem doesn't really teach you how to write the next one better, because you're asked to innovate and make new. So I think I try to remake what other writers have given me, which is that whatever I see that surprises me as I'm writing will hopefully surprise another person, because we are the same species, sharing the technology of language to discover things within us. And so that's the faith. And I believe in Horace's, credo that nothing human is foreign to me. So I want to go deeper and darker and stranger, and I feel like that strangeness would be understood by another person, because we lived here. We live in these bodies. We live, there's gravity. There's so many things that are shared. And for me, the poem or the novel is really like a town square or a synagogue, really. The space that we curate. Somebody curated this. Somebody made this beautiful stained glass Star of David, right? There's intention here. But each one of us, in cohabitation with this space, have a different relationship to it. We see it differently. We have different meanings. What we do, the ideas that this sparks for us, right? It comes from a curation, but the reception is absolutely idiosyncratic down to the DNA. And I think I really respect that about the act of reading and writing. And so for me, it's like, I just hope that I can come out of the work with something that surprised me. And if it surprised me, then I hope that it will surprise others. You know, when I'm reading Rimbaud, sometimes I don't know where it comes from, right? But that shock, that stunning image, when I think of Dickinson saying, I know the poem when it knocks my head off, right? Her syntax and her lines is so stunning. Her master letters, right? We're so interested in who is the master in those letters. What is she talking about? But what we really feel is the great mystery and the great kinship of this voice questing for a way to understand this condition of being held by gravity in the bodily form with two eyes and a nose, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think that's why energy never dies.
Right.
I could read a 10th century high tang poem and still feel the sadness or joy and the loneliness right off the page onto my body. And I do think that the book then is a conduit to an everlasting circuit. And my own books are the same thing. Each one of them, all three of them, are just, links connecting the same current of energy through the same themes, but in different architectures.
And I completely see that too, just thinking about the themes and what you are drawn to. You did say that you don't think about your reader, but one thing we have talked about before, and that I think about constantly now that Seeing Ghosts is out, is just how the book is no longer mine. Do you know what I mean? When you write something and then you finally put it out for other people to consume and be a part of, it changes.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there have been instances where you have been surprised and learned something from other people's interpretations of your work. Because I find that quite powerful. It's really humbling in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I haven't been so surprised by folks' interpretation, because I think when I teach, when we teach literary criticism, we teach it in literary criticism, in a way, comes from two branches of thought, poetics and hermeneutics, right? Poetics being the how, hermeneutics, coming from religious study, is the what, the interpretation. And I think when I write, I'm always writing with the respect that everything is open to interpretation. Roland Barthes says the death of the author. I believe that to a certain extent. And so I've heard very wild and open interpretations, but they're not surprising to me. They're exactly as they should be. I don't think there's a wrong way to receive a book, because it's there. And I think for me, publication is like sending a raft downriver. I don't want to stay on that raft because I can't make anything without destroying that raft. I can't make anything new. I have to stay on the shore. And you send your work downriver and you let it go. This is actually the most beautiful and valuable part of publication, is communication with your community, and with a community that stretches across borders. I love that. I'm not precious with what I meant. Sometimes I don't know what I meant. Sometimes what I mean changes. I'm not so interested in the agenda of forcing meaning to land in a reader. I'm more interested in creating an architecture in which a specific feeling could be felt and thought and understood and held, and that could also grow. Sometimes you read something and you feel like you get it, but then a week or two later, it transforms into another idea based on how you've lived.
Yes.
Right? So in a way, the text is only the beginning. It's only the beginning of the relationship with the reader, right? How they live their lives after the text is actually the beauty. And I almost don't want to know that, right? And whatever I do know, when readers tell me, I think it's absolutely right and justified. And I'm not, I don't think there's a wrong or right way to hold and carry a book inside you.
I love how you put that. And just so everyone knows, I just got the 5-minute signal. We will be taking audience Q&A. There are 2 microphones up here, so if you have a question, you can come up in about 5 minutes or so and ask Ocean whatever you want. Or maybe not whatever you want, but...
I'm open.
He's more open than I am.
I want to ask you a question, though.
Okay.
So much of our work, for better or for worse, have been positioned around losing our mothers.
Yes.
And losing them while they're here, and losing and gaining them after they're gone in many ways. And we talk about, we're in our 30s now, and we're talking about family, and there's this aspirational mothering that you talk about your future identity, your future position as a mother. And I'm curious, with all of your work and all of your meditations on this, what do you hope to be when you think about that word, that big capacious word that means so much to both of us?
That is such a good question. I think in my work, and I see this a lot in yours too, there's this desire that I have to almost recreate my mother, because when someone passes, they're no longer there, and you have just a memory of them, which is imperfect, and it is changing. It's so malleable, because memory is malleable. And I think that can be really painful in a lot of ways. And I think when I was writing Seeing Ghosts, that was incredibly hurtful. And it took really being able to lean into the idea that I was creating a new image of my mother that I could always interact with. And I guess to answer your question, when I think about becoming a mother one day, or having, friendships even where I feel almost like a mother, one thing we've been talking a lot about between Ocean and I is the ways in which we seek relationships that are so nurturing. And I think whether I am a mother to a human child or a mother to a friend or something of that nature, it's really important for me to be able to hold space for any relationship where it's very intentional, and that I'm very aware of the types of impact my emotions or my words can have. And I think it feels very much a writer thing now that I've written Seeing Ghosts, where I am so aware of the lens through which I see the world. And I want to be able to pass that down to someone, or I want to be able to share that with people, even if that's not quite the lens that they will take. Right. Do you know what I mean?
Right. I couldn't think of it better myself.
Yeah. How do you see motherhood?
Lord, it's important for me to first see motherhood as a humanhood. And writing about, various mothers, it's important to not have to avoid the tropes of the doting mother, the tiger mom, the strong women. And I think for me, I had to render folks in all of their complexity in order to reposition, particularly Asian women, and reposition them with their humanity, which includes their flaws, right? Their obsessions, the things that they love, the curating of self-pleasure. One of the poems in this book is just a list of Amazon purchases
I love that poem.
by a mother. And I think, there's something so ancient about that, right? For as long as our species has been alive, mothers have been going to various markets and making decisions about what will sustain themselves and their family, right? What beautifies themselves and to beautify their family. And so there's so much caring in this project of acquisition, right? And there's a lot to say about late capitalism and its destructions, and that all of that is valid. At the source of that, though, right? Because those are systems And there's people inside systems. It's important for me to see the intention around shopping is actually care and support and nurture.
And it's a history.
Yes, yeah, and it's a history, so you can start to map the debris of a life through the objects. This is William Carlos Williams' Imagist credo, no ideas but in things. And somehow it felt truer than any elegy could perform with rhetoric than just to have the objects there, because the objects are imbued with meaning, because they're imbued with intent.
Yes.
Somehow the desire coiled into that is more human, even though we're talking about inanimate objects.
And in a way, you're allowing these things to be reinterpreted over and over again in so many different ways. And I think it felt, reading that poem, it felt as though I was there with you, looking at this Amazon history, or there with you, cleaning out your mother's belongings, which is something that many of us have done. Yeah. And you can feel it so viscerally. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
So now we have some time for questions, and I have some from the internet. What a novel thing. Okay, and so as y'all are getting ready to share your question, I'm going to read you one here. Ocean, this is from Kat in DC, who I promise is not me. Although if it's a good question, maybe I can take credit. As you look back, do you see periods where your voice changed? And if so, do you have insight as to what drove those changes?
The voice, I think, always changes, but we always have possessed them. I don't believe in this idea of finding your voice. I don't think anybody's voice is lost. I think we acquire registers to make felt and translate the voice inside us. It's almost like, more flutes, in the organ, right? You're just acquiring, more bars in the organ. And one of my heroes is C.D. Wright, the late C.D. Wright, and she's somebody who wrote and really respected all vernaculars and dialects available to her. Like, the way she wrote was to really be at the seat and at the altar of the sentence in all of its manifestations, and to carry its regional histories along with her, and then play with that, right? And so I think voice can change depending on how you acquire skills, how you manipulate your clauses. Can you sustain the subordinate clause long enough before you introduce the independent clause? These things are all new skills to register and make manifest one voice. It's all one voice. It's one breath moving through and distributed through the various channels. And so it changes. And sometimes if you look back at your work and you're not happy with it, that's a good thing. It means you've grown.
Yeah.
I tell my students this: don't be sad if you don't love what you've written last year. Congratulate yourself. You've made a discernment. You've acquired new registers. And you can either revise or write the next thing. It's all one thing. You already have everything you need. You just have to participate in your art. Reading, writing when you want to. I don't write every day. I don't think you should write every day. Writing is not just moving letters across the page. Writing is living and thinking and watching and having, again, this faith that the world that you're participating in is inexhaustible. You could enter the same synagogue every night and have a different thought. Because you entered your room every night and you have a different thought. You've entered your kitchen, your house, your friend's house multiple times, your grandmother's house. You've had different thoughts. You've written different things inside them. So it's about proximity altering what we already possess inside us. Right? You don't have to acquire knowledge. You have to reveal it. And I think this is something that Buddhism really taught me. In Buddhism, we have this metaphor that knowledge is not light coming in. Like often there's a common a metaphor of light as this movement, this material movement, moving through darkness. And so we have to acquire more light to know. But in Buddhism, knowledge is the dusty mirror that you just clean, right? And we say that you can spend a whole life meditating and learning, and you can just probably, if you're lucky, clean one corner of that mirror. So the knowledge is complete. It's about rendering it visible and legible. And that is the work of learning, I think. It's uncovering
I love that.
what's already there.
Knowledge is a dusty mirror. So we can take your question up here if you want to try and use the mic. And if not, I can repeat it for you.
Hi, Ocean. Xin chào. My question is, how do you incorporate your Vietnamese upbringing into your writing while withholding sacred moments for yourself?
Incorporating Vietnamese upbringing into my writing. To me, it's not a conscious decision, because if I make it conscious, then I tokenize where I've come from. I say, look at this little colorful spice, this Vietnamese spice I want to put on to spice it up. And I can't. I refuse to see and exotify a central part of my life. And I think it took me a long time, I admit, a long time to get there, because so much of one's education as a writer in America will snuff that out. They either say you should perform the spice or you should take it all out, right? But never are you told that you should center it. And I think I'm getting to the point where I wonder if I am a marginalized writer. We use that term a lot, because I don't feel like one. What I write is the center of my life. Vietnameseness has always been the center of my life. It has never been on the margins. So I don't feel like I have to translate it, right? The Vietnamese in my books have no glossary. They're not even in italicized. They are not exotified by a different font. They stand on equal measure with the English. And that is truly how I feel. But it's a political, formal enactment when the page, because the sentence is a stage, and how you stand on the stage will dignify your material, right? It's a linear technology. The sentence starts and it ends with a period, and what exists within that space is how you charge value. And so when I sit down at the page, I write with my whole self. And Vietnamese comes in, and other things comes in, right? It's important for me not to sit down with the check boxes already checked. Because often, there will be one or two, queer, Asian American, what have you. But if I sit down with those already checked, I will now be beholden to something that the culture has abstracted. Right? The individual is then abstracted into a category, which is why I have a very uneasy relationship with the word representation. Because why should any one of us represent any group of people? But that is the organizing project of diversity, as I see it now. Right? Someone should represent. Why should I represent Vietnamese Americans? We are so much more than one person. We have so many different ideas than one person. And the cynicism in that project is that it actually abstracts a group of people back to a category, and a category is more easily managed. So now there's a sort of aporia inherent in that project. That in the project of representation, we've actually diluted ourselves further. So it's no easy task to approach, and everyone will have a different way. But for me, I have to allow myself the capacity to be more than what the categories have put me into. Yes, I'm queer, Asian American. I'm also a dog lover, a brother, a lover of mixed martial arts. Right? I like lilacs. You know? And there are identities that I don't even know yet. To me, identity is not a finite, foreclosed experience to be expressed in language. Because to do that project is to lean on the reduction that our experiences are finished with. They are calcified, and we are merely transforming or translating a calcified rock, right? Something that is dead, to the larger culture. But I refuse to believe that all my identities, both known and unknown to me, are dead. To me, the process is the project. The questing of what is Asian Americanness, what is dog loverness, that's an ongoing project. And we need to have all of us participating in it, because all of us will have different renderings of that experience, right? So to me, identity is not a box or a condition, but a project. We are always on our way to it. We are always on the cusp of it. We are always rediscovering and expanding it, right? And I say that, for example, you know, my Asian American friends are very surprised when I say, you know, having grown up in New England, and again, being a New England Asian is very different than a California one.
Oh, yes, so different. Do we have California Asians in here? Okay.
There's a lot of them.
Nice for you guys. Lucky you.
The New England Asian experience is lonely, cold. I didn't have
So cold.
I didn't have boba till I was 29 years old.
Okay.
Boba, don't know her, right?
We went to one Asian grocery store called Adong,
Yeah, and so
the only one in the Hartford
we're
area.
expanding. We're expanding Asian American identity here, right? Tonight. Don't know boba. I came to it late, but I do love her. I do love her. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
We can take this one here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, Ocean. As a young Asian American queer artist myself, thank you for building homes for us to exist in and nurture ourselves in. As you write your own pasts into the present and turn your presents into pasts, I'm wondering what you think the future of poetry might look like, or what you hope it to be.
I want to think deeply about this because I think there's so much at hand here. I don't want to just say it's bright. Because I do think it's bright. I guess what I would say is that I never expected that we would get where we are right now so quickly. Those who are writers in their 30s and 40s might know that in 2008, the literary world looked very different. You open Poetry magazine, and it looks very, very different, right? You open the New Yorker, it was very different. And when I started, all the doors were closed. The Asian American Writers Workshop, I was a young writer in New York, it was just not open. It was, moving, or they had financial problems. Poets House was also closed. There was no fellowships or residencies. Everything was closed. And the message that I got was sort of, wait your turn, wait in line. And in a way, it helped me just work because there was no access. There was very little community. And I had this relationship with the text that I think is actually really important to me, which is this community with the page. You commune with the dead and the living. And what I said about energy surviving through eons is true when you read. And I learned that you only need one other person to really care about the same thing to have a community. The more the better, but you only just need one other person. 2 people to talk to each other about poetry and what you care about is enough, right? The great myth in the Bible is that it was just 2 people that started all this, right? And I think we can borrow that myth in a different, perhaps even queerer ways. That the more people that get together amongst us, 2 people with one idea is a community. And so that's where I came from, and I've seen various circles of that amplify. And the wealth that we've had now, I never imagined as a young writer. The access that we have, just seeing you in before me. My shame is that I never imagined you well enough. And I think I'm trying to go back and undo that. And I think as I write forward, again, the sentence is a linear technology, I'm also trying to undo the life that led me to the failure of never imagining so many of us could be doing this. Again, you have to really be writing in 2008 to know what I'm talking about, but it felt absolutely impossible. And I'm just really happy to see you here.
Thank you. I'm imagining myself too, or working on it. Thank you.
Hi, Ocean. I'm obviously a sign language user using American Sign Language. I am a bilingual, and I know that you are also multilingual. I was wondering if your knowing 2, 3, or more languages has impacted your writing or your inner thoughts in regard to writing. And when you write in one language, do you think about another language, or do you delineate the 2?
I've always felt like I operate with a different rhythm than standard English, and that's because of the Vietnamese. Vietnamese is monosyllabic, right? So how you inflect a single word changes what you mean. Even a simple word like M-A, which stands for mother. Ma, mother, ma, but this, but that. Ma, grave, ma, horse. Ma, 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 ma. As a Vietnamese child, if you're not paying attention, you're in trouble. Right? So my ear was tuned to precision. So when I entered the multisyllabic English, I heard every syllable, and it was pleasure. It was music. To me, the language was musical. Vietnamese is musical. There's tonal, right? And so I listen on a syllabic level, and I think it feels like Vietnamese has given me a superpower in English. It's made my wielding of English better. And I have, my mother tongue to thank for it. And I think that's, that's why it was very difficult for me to write in iambic pentameter in the sonnet. It felt like techno to me, which I also don't love. It felt like house music, right? Da-da, 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 da-da. And it felt like galloping, right? This, it felt violent to me. And I just, the beats were too fast, and I prefer something more meandering. And I really struggled with the sonnet's iambic pentameter, but then I loved Hopkins' sprung rhythm, right? His verse made a lot more sense to me. Having the stronger stress suddenly opened things up. But I think, I listen to English differently. Even to this day, it sounds, it's almost like there's two songs playing. There's a Vietnamese song, and then there's an English song playing at once. And sometimes they syncopate together into this perfect harmony. And when that happens on the page, I just get so happy, I almost stop writing. You know, you ever get that moment where you write a line so good, you just got to go for a walk? It's so rare. It's so rare. But sometimes it's like, wow, I did that. I don't want to mess it up now, so I'm going to go for a walk. And sometimes the two languages work that way, and I just feel like the poetry gods have chosen me today, and I just thank them. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions. We can do one from each aisle.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. My question is actually for both of you. Well, first I just want to say thank you for being here today, and also thank you for writing. Your works are really beautiful. So my question is about the writing process, because I think Kat, your book, Seeing Ghosts, and then your new poetry collection, Ocean, Time as a Mother, both deal with loss. And I'm wondering, you kind of alluded to this in the Q&A, but how you deal with memory, reconstruction, resentment. I mean, I don't know if these are feelings that came up or even the process, because to write about something so personal, the loss of someone so close to you and who raised you, I'm sure is very difficult. So I was wondering if you two could speak to that.
I think that writing Seeing Ghosts was almost a lifelong endeavor since I lost my mom. It felt as though I was trying to tell that story in so many different ways. And even from a young child, I knew that I needed to bring her to life in some way. So the title is Seeing Ghosts. My mother, in a way, is an imagined ghost. And I found that really important to give me something to write toward. And I think Ocean, writing toward someone in that way, an address to my mother, it made it so much less painful because I could continue to speak to her when my family couldn't talk about her. Or language, in a way, we've been talking so much about language, it became this way for me to express this grief that I had just kept inside. And not to say, again, that it was cathartic or healing, and it was certainly not easy. There were so many times where I would have to call friends or I would have to walk away from the project. But in reconstructing my mother, it felt almost like a gift. I kept saying that I was really sad when I was done writing it because I felt as though I'd finally defined myself with language. And I finally was giving myself the tools to sort of share how losing a mother was my whole identity, more so than being the daughter of Chinese immigrants or the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong or Asian American or what have you. But it was being a motherless daughter that I felt was how I saw myself. So to be able to share that, it felt as though finally I could speak.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. I think often I'm asked a question similar to this, which is, how can you be so vulnerable in your work? How do you survive? How do you tend to the difficult task of writing these subjects? And it's not the easiest thing in the world. It's not the hardest thing in the world. But I've always felt that it was never a burden. This is what I signed up for. This is the task at hand. The writer's job, in my opinion, is to look at the dark and the light and make something out of it that we can share with each other. I signed up for this. And there's a moment when you realize not only that you signed up for this, but that you can do it well enough. And when that happens, you realize you are obligated to the task. And coming from a working class family, watching my elders' bodies break down in factories and nail salons, getting lost working night shifts, not seeing them sometimes for months, even though they're sleeping in the next room. I felt like it's such a privilege to sit here. My mother would take my hand towards, even when I was an adult, every time I'd see her, she'd take my hand, she says, "My goodness, they're so soft." "Tai con mềm quá, cái tay mềm quá." You must keep your hands this soft. Don't harden them like the rest of us. And that's because my work was holding a pen. But I realized also that when they bowed their heads at the pedicure chair or the manicure chair, when they bowed their heads to beautify others, they take the position that I also end up taking when I write. I too bow my head. And I realize I've been learning from them my whole life, this posture. And to me, I'm both digging, but I'm also preserving. The space of the page is not a given. It's space that they made for me by toiling in these factories and nail salons. They made that space for me with their bodies. They kept that page clean and open and wrinkle-free. So when I approach it, it's never a question of should I be doing this, or how close or how far should I go. To me, it's always go further. Go further. But if it hurts, if it's difficult, you can stop, take a walk. But I always tell myself, I have to go back. We choose many things in life. We don't have to be a writer. But when we sit down, we have chosen it. When you're writing, you're in it. Right? Expect to go deep. It is your task. And if you don't have, if it's too much, you can go out. But I've always felt that it's never a burden, and it's never a challenge, but it's expensive on the soul, right? Writing is expensive work on the soul. It costs a lot. But the joy, when you find that thing, when you surprise yourself, it's so humbling because you're being an apprentice of failure. Every sentence has a potential to fail. Forget about rejections and CVs and professionalization. You're failing with every sentence. And it's so humbling when you get it right and you surprise yourself and you feel so powerful. I live for those moments, and acquiring those skills allowed me to go deeper into the darker places so that I know how valuable the light is. And you can do that in the ecosystem of a book. And someone else can read that and say, my God, me too. To me, that's the ultimate thesis of literature, is for strangers to say, wait a minute, you're not too far away from me. Even though we're across continents, we are right here. Me too. That's worth all the difficulties that writing pushes through.
Thank you.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Kat. Hi, Ocean. I lost my mother almost 7 years ago this week, and one of the most challenging things in those 7 years has been navigating sort of the tension of wanting so desperately to have the exact same experiences that my friends get when they get to share great things about their mothers, and that tension of, do I remain quiet or do I bring up the fact that my mom has died? And then, of course, the second part of that being that folks' response is, I want so desperately for the response to that to be, what was she like? Tell me something about her, but it's not. It's, I'm so sorry, what happened, right? And I find that people react with that news with focusing on the loss. So I want to know if either of you have found language for that moment. Have you found a way that words can help navigate that space of like Thank you so much for saying sorry, but I'd really rather spend the time telling you about her as opposed to focusing on the fact that she died.
I think, well, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss.
I told you.
Would you like to tell us about your mother?
My mother was an incredible woman. She was, I am white on both sides, but my mother was born in Taiwan because her dad was in the military. She lived in Germany for 14 years. By the time she left the United States Army, she spoke 5 languages. She went on to be a teacher until she realized the only kids that she could tolerate were her own. And then she left that work for a job in social work, and her entire life was about making sure that me and my 2 brothers had everything that we needed, despite most often not quite being able to provide what we wanted. She was fascinating. She and I have such a deep love for books together that I never walk into a bookstore without thinking about her and frankly have a conversation with her while I'm in there, right? Yeah, she was fascinating. So thank you for asking.
I think the stories that we tell about our mothers are so important, to have ownership of that in a way, because that's ours. And I think a lot about the ongoing relationships that we have with the people who are no longer here, right? And how we are the only ones who can define them. And so I don't want to be prescriptive, but I think that for me personally, for so long it was hard to speak of my mother. It was scary, it was painful, and sometimes it still is, clearly, because I'm crying. But I think that it's so important to take hold of those stories and share what we can, and to share and lead with that too. Yeah, what do you think, Ocean?
So much of our culture as a species is to turn away from death, and we're all heading there. And I think making space for a conversation around loss is such a powerful thing. And it's, when you felt it, you know something. You're in the know. You have access to a truth. When I watched my mother take her last breath, it was the closest thing I've ever felt to truth. It's not even honesty. Honesty is a medium for truth. But when someone dies, it's truth without translation. And grief, in fact, is the last translation of love. It's a translation that you'll have to commit to for the rest of your life. It's an ongoing project. It's where love ends up. And that's an incredible thing. So instead of, asking or trying to find a way to have a conversation or having your friends, because if they don't know it, they don't know what to say, right? So they're a symptom of the restrictions of the culture. The culture does everything to avoid this, everything to distract from this moment. We hide the body. We put the body in hospice. We put the curtains up. We put the sheets up, right? It's very difficult to tend and face it. So I think it's important. You could be a leader amongst your friends. You could pioneer into this space and say, let's open a space for this. We're all here. Has anyone lost anyone? A grandfather, a friend? You ask that question enough, you realize there is that bond. I'm skeptical of a universal, but I felt that the closest I've gotten to a universal is watching, and not just my mother, but many loved ones, friends included, die. It's the great mystery that we're all trying to wonder about. And it's a beautiful thing. It can be, depending on how you perceive it, to curate and prepare for a beautiful death. It's a privilege. My mother got to take her last breath surrounded by loved ones at home. It was horrific. As a son, did I wail and scream and crumble over her? Of course. But now I'm a citizen in this country of grief. And I realized there are so many of us here. And there have been millions of ancestors here. That as someone who is grieving, there are more on your side than otherwise. You are among the majority when it comes to a species-wide negotiation. But you are a minority often among the living. So you would do what all language at its most powerful is, to use that language as a bridge. And the beautiful thing about literature and these difficult conversations is that the bridge becomes a destination. This liminal space that was meant for utilitarian crossing becomes a site where we encounter each other. And if there's ever a metaphor for what we do as writers and thinkers, or just as people opening this conversation, is meeting and making a destination of the bridge. So you're actually much more powerful in those moments. But we're taught to be nervous and anxious. Oh God, how do I breach this subject? I'm gonna be a Debbie Downer, right? I'm gonna ruin everyone's night. But see yourself as a leader in this, because you have the knowledge, and that knowledge of losing your mother is a wealth. Present it as such. And I guarantee you, your friends will end up in a rich, rich place for that.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ocean. Thank you so much, Kat, for joining us tonight. And thank you all for being here. If you could please be kind enough to stay in your seats while our guests leave the sanctuary, it would be greatly appreciated. You might need to cry a little bit too, so, you know.
Thank you. Bow, bow. I love you. I love you.